Shalom Aleichem to everybody. Good Yantiv, Zman Simchasenu. Here we are in our Sukkah, Tuf Shin Pei Aleph, the first day of Chol Moed Sukkos. I want to discuss the Halachos of Minim and virtually show you how to check, how to look, and how to acquire the Minim. This is an area where the Pri Megadim writes, Hayodim Mu'atim. There are very, very few people who know the Halachos of Minim well, and thus we rely on those Mochrim, those who are selling the Minim. We purchase an Aleph, a Beis, a Gimel, a Chinuch, and really we don't know the difference between an Aleph, a Beis, a Gimel, and even a Chinuch. There are many who are unaware of what they're purchasing, how to purchase, and why there's a distinction in the value and in the price of the Minim. I hope to be able to share with you some of the most basic halachas in terms of checking your Minim, knowing how to purchase, and ultimately if there is a problem over the days of Yom Tif as to whether or not something is an issue or not. Let's start with the lulav. I apologize, it's a little bit difficult to see, you won't see fully, but I like to give a bit of a demonstration virtually to show you what you are looking for. When it comes to the lulav, there are two primary things that you need to be aware of. Number one is the shedra, and number two is the tiomis. The shedra is the spine of the lulav. It's very easy to find the spine. It's the shiny back part of the lulav that is very, very straight and very thick and very obviously stuck together. That is the shedra. What emerges from the shedra is called the tiomis. The tiomis is the most middle point and piece of the entire lulav, and that's the tiomis what you're looking for. The Rama in Shulchan Aruch writes that it's the tiomis that's the most critical aspect of the entire lulav to make sure that we check the kashrus of it. Now, it's not so easy to find the tiomis. Many Gedolei Yisrael, many experts, Bikiyim and Halachos lulav have taught us how to check and how to find the tiomis. I'll share with you how I was taught from a Rafal Reichman, one of the experts, one of the great experts in the area of Halachos lulav and Minim specifically. And if you follow the shedra along the entire way, you can start to notice in the Rambam as well as the Shulchan Aruch Paskins like the Rambam that every piece of the lulav actually has a partner and a second half to it. Every leaf is really made up of two leaves. Now, if you follow the shedra very carefully and you start dividing up the leaves, following the shedra, following the spine, you'll start to begin to notice that you can find leaves separating. Now, if you look carefully, as I have right here, divided out from the shedra, and I'll start to separate 1 and 2. Each one has a zoger. Before Reichman told me this is the way that the Brisker Rav used to look for the tiomes. You separate one from the other, and here you are is the middle leaf. This leaf is called the tiomes, and ultimately it follows back to the spine of the entire lulav to the bottom. This leaf is the most critical leaf to make sure that it's closed the whole way. This is what the Gemara says in Parak Lulav Agazel, Nechlika ha-tiomis pasul. If the tiomis, this middle leaf, is open, that is going to be pasul. The Mishnah Berurah notes there's a three-way machlokes as to how open is called open, which is pasul. The first is the opinion of the Chai Adam. If it's open even a mashahu, a minuscule amount, if there's any split or separation at all, it's pasul. The second opinion is the opinion of the Taz. The Taz writes that it's if open a tefach. A tefach is about 4 inches or so, a little bit less than 4 inches, then it's pasul. And the final shita, the shita of the Mishnah Berurah, following the opinion of the Bira Agra, the Vilna Gaon, as long as the tiomes, rove, the majority of it is closed, it's kosher. The Mishnah Berurah says you could pass like the Vilna Gaon Mikra Adin, and as long as the tiomes is closed for most of the way, it's kosher Mikra Adin. Yisrael Kedoshim Heim, and we look to make sure that the tiomes is completely closed. Therefore, those who are medaktikim, experts and are very cautious, careful, meticulous, and scrupulous to find the perfect lulav, they look very carefully to make sure that the tiomes is absolutely closed. If you look at this middle leaf, the tiomes here, it is perfectly closed. It's hard to see, but you'll notice that's how we look for the tiomes, and that's how we find it. I'll show you on another lulav, just so you have another sense of how it is that we find the tiomes. Again, you're looking for the shedra. The shedra is the spine, the back of the lulav. It's the flat, shiny piece, and if you keep on following it all the way up until the top, until it starts to break, and then you start looking. Start splitting the leaves, 1 and 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 1, 1 and 1, and here you have the middle leaf is the tiomes. Again, it looks completely closed, not open at all. I will show you that every leaf is made up of two. As you can see, there are two halves of the leaf that come on top of one another. It's closed till the top, and this is a kosher lulav me'ikra adin lechatchila, no opening at all. According to the Chayei Adam, as I mentioned, it's not even open to mashahu. Absolutely, certainly according to the Taz, it's kosher 100% lechatchila. It's not open at tafach, and of course, according to the Gra, it's rov closed, and this is a kosher lulav lechatchila. Both of these lulavim. It is interesting to note that very rarely will you find something called shnei tiyomisim, which means two tiyomises, two middle leaves. And again, that's possible if you keep on following the lulav and the shedra of the lulav, and you keep on doing what I do. You follow the spine, and when the spine finally cracks, again, as you look, you find one and one, one and one, and here you have one. That's our tiyomis. Sometimes you'll find shnei tiyomisim, two tiyomisim. And Tosfos quotes the Gaon Meseches Bava Kama Perek Meruba that if you have two tiyomisim, it's actually puzzle. We don't paskin like this. It's not found in Shulchan Aruch. However, the Bikurei Yaakov Rabbi Yaakov Edlinger, the classic sefer in Hilchos Sukkah and Hilchos Lulav, writes that Me'ikra Adin, you should not use a lulav that has two tiyomisim. Mishnah Berurah doesn't quote it, but nonetheless, Rabbi Yaakov Edlinger writes that you shouldn't, and therefore there are those who are machmir not to use a lulav that has two tiyomisim. That's the main issue to check when it comes to a lulav. There are other areas that you need to look for as well. And that's the general view of the lulav. If you take a look, and you could hold the lulav two ways. You could hold it this way, or you could hold it this way, meaning horizontally or vertically. And both ways you'll get a sense if the lulav is straight. The lulav should be straight. The lulav should not be bent. The spine should be absolutely straight. If you take a look at this lulav, it's straight both vertically as well as horizontally. You'll also note that the lulav shakes a little bit, and that's appropriate. Certainly for Minig Ashkenaz, when we're doing the na'anuim on the lulav, we want the leaves to shake, and therefore here you see the shaking of the lulav, and that is again lechatchila what should happen. What the Mishnah talks about in the beginning of the third parak lulav agazl, is nifredu ha'alim or nifritzu. If they're split at the spine or if they're split at the edges not of the spine. That's where we have a problem. Nifritzu or nifridu, but that's rare to find, and here you'll see that that's not an issue whatsoever. The Sefer Halachos Shlomo, Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, in Parak Asiri, notes that Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach in his notes had the following things that he was cautious, meticulous to look for when he was purchasing a lulav. Hidurim b'lulav. What are the areas where one wants to be mahader? One wants to search for the perfect lulav. Number one, lo yeh bal shtei tiyomis. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, even though he paskined like the Mishnah Berurah, not like the Bikurei Yaakov, that you can have a lulav that has two tiyomisim, two middle leaves, nonetheless he for himself didn't purchase a lulav that had two middle leaves. Number two, Reb Shlomo Zalman, lo yeh yavesh lamala. We all know that a lulav which is yavesh, which is dry, is pasul. This lulav is absolutely positively green. There's no yavshus bechlal. Rabbi Reichman told me that the way to check if a lulav is yavesh is to put it against your shirt, a shirt that's white, and if you look at the shirts that's white, and if there's any contrast on the shirt whatsoever, then the lulav is not considered to be yavesh. But if you look at the tip of the lulav and the tiyomes, that's an area where you have to be extra cautious and careful to make sure that there's no yevashus, there's no dryness whatsoever. And again, if you're looking at this lulav, and again I apologize, it's not so clear, not so easy to see, that's another area you want to make sure that your lulav is not yavish. The third thing that Reb Shlomo Zalman was meticulous about, lo yeh mechusa b'kara, that the lulav shouldn't be covered with the kara. The kara is that brown sheathing that you'll find on your lulav. This is the kara over here. This is the kara that often just falls right off the lulav. And Reb Shlomo Zalman noted that very often on the tiyomes you could have the kara covering the entire tiyomes. That, Reb Shlomo Zalman said, should not be taken. Many Sfardim actually prefer to take a lulav that has kara because they understand that if it's closed with the kara, that's a guarantee that the tiyomes is absolutely positively closed. Minig Ashkenazim, like I mentioned before, is that there should not be kara because when you're doing your na'anuim, you want the lulav to shake. So therefore, you don't want to have any kara, and therefore Shlomo Zalman himself looked for a lulav that had no kara whatsoever. Furthermore, he writes, Yishoyer tefach min hashudra la'achar gova hahadas v'ha'arava. If you take a look at your lulav, and back to our shidra, our spine, the Shulchan Aruch writes that the shedra should be four tefachim. 4 tefachim is about 16 inches, and the shedra is measured from the bottom of your lulav until the shedra stops, until you begin to see the tiyomes. That's the middle leaf emerging from the shedra. So therefore you need about 16 inches. Most of the lulavim that we're purchasing and acquiring are well more than 16 inches. Take a look at this lulav, for example, is probably double that length. But if you take a look here, you want to make sure, said Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that when you place your hadassim and aravos, that you leave behind a tefach of the shedra. Many people don't do this, aren't aware of this, but it's an explicit halach in Shulchan Aruch, Siman Tuf Reish Nun, where the Shulchan Aruch writes explicitly that you need to leave a tefach that's about 4 inches worth of the shedra on top of the hadassim ravos. So if you have your hadassim on the right side and you have your aravos on the left side, make sure that over the course of Sukkot that your hadassim and aravos aren't getting caught, and they're not going to climb, and they're not going to leave you any room by your shedra. So make sure, and this is a basic halacha that many people are unaware of, to make sure that you have a tefach worth about 4 inches of space on top of your hadassim and aravos. So the shedra is not here. The shedra is where the spine ends. The spine ends, at least in this lulav, over here, because as you notice, that's where the lulav starts to split and starts to break up into your tiyomas. Here's the shedra. So you want to leave about a tefach, and that we absolutely, certainly have as well. Finally, Reb Shlomo Zalman said, "Lo yeh kafus ke'etz ki apri megadim mistapek leposlo." You want to make sure that your lulav is not stiff as a tree. The lulav should shake, and as I mentioned, according to Minim Ashkenaz, you want your lulav to shake, certainly during the na'anuim, that there should be some movement. That's part of hidur mitzvah, zekeli vanveu, that your lulav is shaking, that your lulav is moving, and therefore Rabbi Shlomo Zalman was cautious and careful to buy a lulav that wasn't stiff, that wasn't stuck. Some lulavim we'll see are stiff and stuck. That could come as a result of the kara, the brown sheathing that could create that stiffness of the lulav. And Rabbi Shlomo Zalman wanted to make sure that you're purchasing a lulav that shakes. Some have a chumrah, the Magen Avram notes this in Hilchos Chanukah, to have a very long lulav. That's not mikra adin. Some think that's also beautiful, zekeli v'anveu. But nonetheless, as long as your lulav, the shedra, is 4 tvachim, which is about 16 inches or so, you're absolutely fine. One other note when it comes to lulav, there are those who look to purchase a lulav with a kneppel. That's the Yiddish saying, where it's actually a little bit bent over. Now, indeed, the Shulchan Aruch writes the last sif, and Siman Tuf Reish Mem Gimel Hilchos Lulav, that the lulav should not be bent at all. However, the Mishnah Berurah quotes that the Rush held Ohev Ani. The Rush was improved and enjoyed and looked to purchase a lulav that was bent, but not that the shedra was bent, but actually that the tiyomes was bent over. This is the Hasidic practice today, to look for a lulav that has a knappel, that has a bent, and it bends over something like this. Strict Minig Ashkenaz is not to purchase such a lulav. And that's what Shlomo Zalman Auerbach said. We don't want the kara. We want the lulav to shake during the na'anuim, and thus we do not look to purchase a lulav with a kneppel, but rather to look for a straight, perfect lulav. So in general, just to review, when it comes to lulav, we're looking for 2 things. The general makeup of the lulav, that it's straight, that it's relatively long, that it's at least 4 inches, that it doesn't have kara on the top. And again, the second point is the tiyomes, looking very carefully, very meticulously to make sure that that middle leaf, which emerges from the shedra, is closed. Again, even if it's not completely closed, if it's open a little bit, or if it's open less than a tefach. And according to the Gra, who the Mishnah Berurah paskins like mikra adin, even if rove of the tiyomes is open, that's still kosher lechatchila. And therefore, those are some of the basic halachas overview of the lulav. Let's take a look now at the esrog. What people are looking for when they purchase a mehudar esrog, an esrog you could find anywhere between $20 and $250, are a few hidurim. The first is that they're looking for an esrog that has a nice gidul, or what you call that comes out like a migdal, like a tower. And if you'll notice in this esrog, or in this esrog, the way that it comes out is that it's larger on the bottom, becomes narrower toward the top. This narrow part is called the chotem, and the bottom part of the esrog should ultimately start to round itself out as it gets to the top. A second area where people look for a hider, and this is what exists in the esrog chazanish, is that it's bumpy. The bumpiness of the esrog makes sure that it's not an esrog that's murkav, or not that esrog that is not an esrog, but a classical esrog, has bumps, and it creates sort of the beauty of the esrog zekeli v'anveyu. Another thing that many people look for in an esrog is that the pitum and the oketz is the bottom, the pitum is the top, is that they're directly on top of one another. This one, for example, you'll notice that the esrog here, the pitum is pointing toward the right and the oketz is looking in a different way. Same thing is true in this esrog, where the pitum is straight, but again the oketz is pointed in a different direction. Therefore, many mahadrim are looking to make sure that the pitum and that the oketz are exactly directly underneath each other. Another area that some mahadrim are looking for is that the oketz is actually submerged into the esrog itself. In none of the esrogim that I have and that you see is that the case, but in very expensive esrogim, the oketz actually is sort of indented into the bottom of the esrog. Another hiddur in esrog is that the esrog should be completely yellow, tzahov and not yarok. Yarok is kosher, but many people, what they try to do when it's very, very green is to turn it green and turn it yellow. And one of the tricks of the trade is to place it near apples or in apples, and that could change the color. It takes 2 or 3 days, and your green esrog will turn yellow. But that is another hiddur, is to make sure that it's tzahov, that it's yellow. A final hiddur, and this is what I want to talk to you about significantly, is that there is a pitum. Why is it so important that there's a pitum, and why did Gedolei Yisrael and Gedolei HaPoskim suggest that an esrog should have a pitum, especially today, when many esrogim that are being purchased and that are available are actually without a pitum? I was privileged about 11 years ago to spend a whole day with Rabbi Yehuda Shapiro, who owns the well-known Shapiro Esrogim, his orchard, his pardes outside of Rehovot in Eretz Yisrael, and he showed me how the esrogim grow, which gave me a totally different insight in understanding the world of the pitum and the esrog. The way that an esrog tree or an esrog bush grows, similar to the way that vines of grapes actually grow, is that it begins as a flower. The esrog has a bush, a tree, which begins as a flower. The flower turns to a bud, and then it falls aside. And you're left with something that looks like a match, flat like a match. Half of it is green, and the other half of it is yellow. From the green emerges the esrog, and from the yellow emerges the pitum. From that little minuscule match-like thing, which starts as a bud, which turns to a flower, then it turns into this match-shaped item, and like I said, the green becomes the esrog, and the yellow becomes the pitum. Early on in the growth of the esrog, the yellow half of the match will fall off, and there goes the pitum. And Rabbi Shapiro explained to me that 99% of the esrogim that are purchased today without a pitum is because that it falls off at that very, very early stage of the growth of the esrog, and therefore the major question, the Rash, did this pitum fall off, and at what stage did it fall off, is settled. Because it falls off at a very early stage, and as the Ramah writes in Halachos Esrog, if it falls off derech gidulo, the way that it's growing, it's absolutely positively kosher. And the way to check, the Mishnah Berurah says this as well, is if you take a look at your esrog without a pitum, the 3 esrogim that I have a pitum, if it's a bit indented, if the esrog has a bit of an indentation by the pitum, that's a sign that it fell off at the early stage of its growth. If you see a little bit of a bump and it continues to come out, that's not as good of a sign, because that would be indicative of the fact that the pitum fell off much later. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, Reb Chaim Kanievsky note that even if the esrog, a pitum of the esrog falls off while the pitum is still on the tree, that's still kosher. I'll quote you the words of Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, a chiddush lahalacha, esrog shenafel pitum mirosha b'odo gadol ha'etz. If while the esrog is still on the tree, the pitum falls off while it's still connected to the tree, kosher lechatchila, says Reb Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that esrog is absolutely positively kosher lechatchila, shekein darkam shel esrogim. That's the way esrogim grow, that the pitum falls. And according to the Ramah, the way the Mishnah Berurah explains the Ramah, as long as the pitum falls off in its natural way, meaning at early stages when it's the shape of a match, or even at a later stage as it's growing on the bush, that's still considered to be kosher. Therefore, you should make sure that when you're purchasing an esrog, you're looking to make sure that if you have an esrog without a pitum, that it looks a little bit indented. And if it's a little bit indented, again, that's a very good sign that it fell off in its natural form and it's kosher. Nonetheless, many still prefer to purchase an esrog that has a pitum for 2 reasons. Number one, who knows? Many of us are not experts, and even the experts, it's hard to really tell at what stage it fell off, even though Rabbi Shapiro himself told me that it falls off at this early stage. Nonetheless, it's worthwhile to purchase with an esrog. The second reason he explained to me is because of the beauty of the esrog. An esrog with a pitum looks much nicer, much prettier, much more me'uder than an esrog that does not have a pitum. Therefore, Yosef Shalom Elyashiv, Reb Chaim Pinchas Scheinberg, Reb Moshe Heller, and other experts in Dalet Minim and other Gedolei Yisrael, you could take a look in pictures, prefer to take an esrog with a pitum because of the beauty of the esrog itself. Rabbi Shapiro noted to me that the Shapiro esrogim and any other orchards that are looking to have perfect esrogim with a pitum on it, make sure that along the way they're actually spraying that match-like piece with a particular chemical that keeps the match that I described to you very taut and stiff and strong, so that the yellow part of the match doesn't fall off. And that is what creates the expense in the esrog, because you have people every day spraying with some chemical every little match-like item on this esrog before it finishes to flower, before it finishes to bud, in order to make sure that it's strong and tough, and as a result of that, the price is going to go up. But again, those are some of the hidurim that many poskim gedolis shall look for. Again, completely yellow, bumpy, a pitum exactly parallel to the uketz pushed in just a little bit. There is the most basic area that people are unaware of when they see their esrog and they see marks on it. Is that kosher or not? The most common thing that you'll see is what's called a blettel. Now, you're not going to be able to see from the distance that I'm looking at, but if you look at your esrog, the blettel is a little mark. And many of these marks often, certainly in less expensive esrogim, will be throughout your esrog. Now, the top part of the esrog is the chotem, and that's the more obvious parts to the naked eye, and therefore we're more particular that it's clean on the top. Of course, one who wants to spend money on a perfectly clean esrog, matov manoim. But a blettel is not puzzle. A blettel is simply a mark that comes from the leaf while the esrog is on the tree, brushing up against the esrog. And just like anybody who gets a bruise, you'll get a bruise and then there'll be some sort of bubbling over with some of the internal juice that's going to merge from the esrog is going to come out, and that's going to cause a mark on the esrog, and that's what we term a blettel, which means a leaf ruffling or rustling up against the esrog and causes that mark. That's kosher lechatchila. The only concern in a blettel, of course, is mitzad the yofi, the beauty of an esrog. And again, that's the reason for the more expensive esrogim, they are clean without a blettel, without leaves, and those are the esrogim that the orchards are being very cautious and careful to make sure that there are no leaves around this esrog. They package it, they cover it, and they close it to make sure that there's not going to be any leaves that are going to come up and touch this esrog whatsoever. So therefore, a blettel doesn't pass at all. Often it's a grayish, whitish type of blemish, and if you're looking and you see that that's kosher, it's not a chisaron, there's nothing missing in the esrog. Only if there's something missing in the esrog is going to be puzzle. But a blettel is going to be kosher. Again, make sure that there's nothing missing, but a blettel doesn't lose anything. Another important point to take note of is how closely do I have to look at my esrog to make sure that it's kosher. Today, the common practice is to use a microscope or to look like this. That is not necessary. That's a churma al gabe churma, which we have adapted over the doros. But the Mabit writes that the way to look at an esrog, Moshe Heller and many of the great poskim who I saw checking esrogim, they looked from a regular distance the way you look for an apple or pear and orange in the store. And if it looks relatively clean at this distance, it's considered to be kosher lechatchila. You don't have to take it up to your eye at this place, but rather looking like that if you don't see anything that's kosher. One of the more obvious marks that may exist is a black mark, a black dot, but the poskim note that many of the black dots that we have are not a problem for two reasons. Number one, you can't see it from this distance, and number two, it's not the black dot that the Shulchan Aruch is talking about, because what the Shulchan Aruch is talking about is when it emerges from the esrog itself, and probably a lot of the black dots that we have are coming from an exterior place and an external place, and thus are not going to be problematic. So those are the things you have to look for on your esrog, but noting those problems, you're okay. The question that often comes up, that I'm often asked, is if you have a pitumless esrog, which originally did have a pitum, can you still take it? And the halacha is, absolutely you can, minus day one. The Rama writes that the chisaron, The problem with a pitum is because it's considered to be chaser, it's missing something, and that's only a problem on day one, Yom Tov Rishon. So therefore, if you had a pitum and your kid bit it off or threw it on the floor, and you find that the esrog that you bought with a pitum no longer has a pitum, don't take it on day one, but you're permitted to take it on day two. Now, if you have another option, an esrog with a pitum, or you could take somebody else's and shake somebody else's, that may be the better option. But mikra din halach lemaisa, you're absolutely permitted to use the esrog without the pitum, even though it had a pitum originally, as long as it's after day one. Let's continue and look at our hadassim and aravos, which don't get enough attention, and like to share a few minutes with you about the hadassim. The hadassim, as the Torah refers to them, are anaf eitz avos. Avos means that it's mishulash, and every esrog needs to have 3 leaves that are on each row. Now, the hadassim and the aravos only have to be 3 tvachim. 3 tvachim is roughly 12 inches. And both the hadassim and the aravos, as long as the majority of the 12 inches are kosher, that's all that needs to be there. Therefore, if you take a look at your hadassim, these hadassim for sure are well more than 12 inches. If I'm to take it out of the kochik lachir, they're probably 16 or 17 inches, but all you need is 12 inches worth. Now, those who are meticulous and scrupulous will spend the most amount of time looking for kosher hadassim. And the trick with finding a kosher hadas is not so simple, because you want to make sure that they're even. So take a look at your hadassim, and you want to make sure that the avos and that the cane is exactly even. And if you take a look at these hadassim, again, you can't see directly, but take a look at your hadassim, making sure that the root of each hadas that emerges is going in this exact same circumference as the other. Now, poskim say that it doesn't have to be exactly on the same line, but as long as the roots at some point are related to the other root, that's okay. So if you're to take a tape measure, or you're going to take your hand, and you note that there are roots that come out of each of these 3 leaves, as long as it's on the same basic circumference, that's kosher. Shlomo Zalman Auerbach went a step further, and again he said, like the mabit, as long as they look that they are in a circumference that's relatively exact, that's sufficient, that's enough to be called avos, that they're considered to be kosher. So again, you need 12 inches of kosher hadassim. You want to be counting from top to the bottom. Many times people will take out their hadassim, they'll see missing hadassim, will say these aren't kosher. It's not true. All you need is 12 inches of these 3 leaves, and once you have your 12 inches, then you have absolutely perfect mahudar lechatchila kosher hadassim. On top of that, there's also something else that you have to be aware of. In those 12 inches, as long as you have rove of them are mishulash, as long as the majority of the hadassim of those 12 inches are mishulash, are 3, then that's okay. So of your 12-inch hadassim, if 7 inches worth of your hadassim are 3, again, that's kosher lebracha, absolutely, and it's perfectly fine. Again, Yisrael Kedoshim Heim, and look to purchase hadassim that are mishulash with perfection with 3 tvachim. But again, even within those 12 inches, if you have the majority, they are going to be kosher. When it comes to the aravos, which often get looked at the least, there are 3 basic halachos when you look at aravos, and this the Shulchan Aruch notes in Siman Taf Reish Mem Zayin Dini Arava. We call the aravos arvei nachal because they grow on a stream or on a river. Most aravos grow on a stream. Now, Shulchan Aruch, based upon the Gemara, notes that even if they don't grow on a stream, they're still kosher. Some have a churma that they'll only buy aravos that grow on a stream, but aravos that grow anywhere are absolutely kosher. If you take a look at these aravos, you'll notice 3 things which the Shulchan Aruch says that you have to be careful about. Number 1, Ola Shlo Moshuch Kinachal. The leaf of the arava runs like a river. So if you look at each of your aravos, they run in a straight line like a nachal. That's the first thing you need to look for. Number 2, Piv Chalak, that the exterior of the entire arava is chalak, is flat, there's no indentations. Now, Shlomo Zalman Auerbach did note that even if there's a minor indentation, or a little bite, or a little cut, that's okay. What the Shulchan Aruch means, he said, is that there's a major indent into the edges and into the circumference of the arava of the leaf, then it's possible. The third thing that the Shulchan notes is that kanar shelo adam, that the stem of the arava is edom, is red. Now you'll notice in these aravas, and probably your aravas as well, they're likely green. It takes some time for them to turn red. Shlomo Zalman was makbid that he would only purchase aravas that they were actually already red, but you'll take a look that your green stem will actually turn red. Those are the three halachas that you're looking for in aravas. The Mishnah Berurah notes that often kids will pull off aravas off the trees and they'll sell them. You have to be careful, says the Mishnah Berurah, two things. Number one, that they didn't steal them or take them from somebody who backyard who that doesn't belong to them. And number two, that they're not niktam, that they're not cut off at the top. You have to make sure that the aravos, just like the hadassim and just like your lulav, are perfect till the top. And that takes a lot of time and apprenticeship to know that they're not nektam, especially in the lulav. Therefore, some are meticulous when they buy aravos to buy an aravos that have the lavlov. The lavlov means that the tip of the arava is still there, and you could see that the arava leaf is still emerging from there. Now you'll see on some of the plastic bags of the aravos that I bought that might say yesh lavlov. That is an indication that the top leaf is there, guaranteeing that it's not niktam, that it wasn't clipped off at the top. Therefore, that's a hidur, but not necessary me'ikra din whatsoever. So therefore, these are the basic halachos in terms of guiding you how to purchase your minim, your lulav, your hadassim, your aravos, and your esrog, knowing and making sure that you're purchasing kasher, limahadrin. Minim is something that we should be cautious, careful, meticulous about. I can't encourage you enough to show your minim to your Rav, making sure that your buying is of value. I know many people that spend hundreds and hundreds of dollars on lulavim and esrogim and were brought to me and I told them that they were not kosher. You could often find a beautiful looking lulav and a gorgeous esrog, but if you don't know what you're looking for, you might be missing a most basic halacha. I've seen other people purchase a beautiful esrog for not too much money, and they just got lucky. It was at the end, right before Sukkot, and they found something that's beautiful, but others aren't aware if there's a black dot, if there's a hole, if there's chaser. So there are many, many halachas that you do have to be cautious, meticulous, and careful about. But if you're buying your minim from a socher neman, from an honest and trustworthy salesman, you have much less to be concerned and to be worried about. Wishing everybody a beautiful Yantav, Chag Sameach, a Zman Simcha Seiner for everybody. Enjoy the mitzvah of minim, the Na'anuim, the mitzvah of Yeshiva Sukkah, Shibane Beis HaMikdash, B'mheir V'yameinu, V'sein Chalkeinu B'sarasecha. May we all be zochet to take our minim, to shake them in Lifnei Hashem in the Mizbeach, with the Bayas HaShlishi, B'mheir V'yameinu.